The Shanghai Dragons have finalized their initial 5-man roster for the 2023 season, and it's interesting? Not exactly sure if that's the word I'd use to describe it, but it kind of feels like the Coach Moon crackpot situation is returning from his early Valiant days. I'll let you be the judge, though. You can decide if this is your first time hearing of this roster. So the 5 guys they picked up are Fleta, he's back for another year. Diem, he's making his grand return to OWL, which is awesome. Viper, an Overwatch Korean Contenders prospect. Hisu, and Gangnam Jin. On paper, with a surface-level understanding, this team feels pretty talented and they're a likable group. However, it's when you dive deeper and look at the true meaning behind this announcement is when you start to get confused and maybe a little concerned. Let's just start off with the elephants in the room before getting into the things that actually make sense. So Fleta and Diem are not playing DPS on this team. Fleta is going to be the tank player on this team, and Diem is playing support. 2 of the most famous and liked superstars at the DPS role in the past in this league are completely flip-flopping to different positions, and I can't help but wonder why. Why did this happen? How did we get here? There's so many questions that come with this announcement, but there's no real answers as to why these transitions happened. Why is Fleta literally your only tank player as of right now? That could change when they get their 6th player, but right now you would assume that he is their one and only guy there. And with Diem, with how talented he was at hitscan, why is he suddenly being a support? It's all sorts of strange, like, what do they get out of doing this? Was this something that Coach Moon decided? Did he ask these players to think about switching? Or is this something they decided to do? It all just doesn't seem right to me. It doesn't sit right. It's so confusing. It's not to say there's zero chance it works out, because we have seen players transition to different roles and it has done them well, like Dante, for example, in recent memory. But more often than not, these role switches don't end up doing much, which is why I think it's worth feeling concerned. Fleta as your starting tank? I mean, is that really going to work in your favor? Could you see Fleta playing Winston or something along those lines? It feels extremely cursed and not something that's likely to work in your favor. Fleta's talented and he's shown he can be quite flexible, but those words get a whole new meaning in this kind of situation, and I don't know if he can handle such a thing, playing against these guys who have so much more experience on the role. Now, in all fairness to Fleta, and I suppose Diem as well, they're used to playing under Coach Moon, they spent years under his system, maybe they will be comfortable enough to not have it be as bad as it could, but you know, I just don't know if that's enough because they're playing against guys that have so much more experience on these respective roles. I understand the APAC region is not what it used to be. They're all kind of in a messy situation, but there's going to be teams that look better on paper right off the bat, and there's going to be a lot of challenges for guys like Diem and Fleta to overcome. I will say though, maybe they both just needed a refresher. Fleta obviously didn't play very good at all last year. It was his worst year as an OWL pro, so maybe he needed to make this role swap happen to get back on the right track and regain his confidence and play like the guy we know and love. And with Diem, he hasn't been able to get into OWL for a couple of years since retrying, so maybe a support swap is what he needed to get back on track too. I think this could end up being something that benefits their careers, but it's a big-time risk, and if things quickly fall through for Shanghai and they're bad, well, this might be the end for them. What the heck is Fleta going to even play? Is he going to solo tank, or is he going to play more of like the off-tank things that he has done in the past? He's done decent on Zarya during the GOATS era and whatnot. He's played Roadhog, maybe even a little D.Va from time to time, if I remember correctly. But outside of that, he has little to no experience on tank whatsoever, maybe outside of like some Echo duplications from time to time. There's a lot of pressure on him to perform, especially if he ends up only being the one single tank. And with Diem, the concerns are pretty high with him too. For starters, it's been a couple of years since he's been an OWL. The last couple of years have seen health issues plague him, and him generally just not being good enough to make it back into OWL. And now on top of that, you're putting him on a different role, and which role is he going to play for that matter? It seems like in all likelihood you'd have him be the flex support, as Gangnam Jin transitioned to main support last year, and oftentimes DPS players go to flex support and vice versa. We saw it with Kareev, pre-OWL he was a DPS, then he became a flex support, and then in OWL he went from flex to DPS to flex to DPS to flex. It happened a bunch of times, and I think even Pine played some Zenyatta on LW Blue back in the day. My point is, we see stuff like this occur, so it could be a somewhat natural transition for Diem because he has such cracked mechanics. I have no doubt he could pop off on certain roles, like I could see him doing some nutty things on Baptiste, for example. But when it comes down to being a real healer, having that positioning and outsmarting some of these other world-class support players, I have a lot of questions. The one thing that really worries me in this scenario is the possibility of Diem and Fleta only picking up these new roles somewhat recently. I know it may seem like a long shot, but based off of Coach Moon's past, I wouldn't be all that surprised. He's been a really good coach these last 3 or so years, but during his Valiant days, he was known for making some rather questionable decisions. He swapped Kuki over to main support during the offseason, he had barely any experience at all, and he struggled out there. He had Kareev swap to DPS mid-season while being a support player. He is known for making these types of choices, even if it has been a long time. This is stuff that he has done. There's a world where he maybe encouraged these guys to swap during trials. They're struggling, maybe he played some favoritism here and he wanted them back. Who knows how they ended up coming to this decision? But regardless, it feels fishy, and I'm not the biggest fan of it. Again, not to say that there's zero chance it works out, but given Coach Moon's past and what these guys are known for, you gotta feel pretty worried as a Dragons fan. If Fleta and Diem maybe had some better help around them, there'd be reason to feel somewhat confident as they can improve with a good team that covers up their weaknesses and helps them improve rather fast. But this isn't the same team from a couple of years ago that won a championship. They're still decent, they still have some good talent, but they don't have those amazing superstars anymore. Let's talk about those guys, by the way. Let's move over from Fleta and Diem. You get the idea. It's hella confusing, it makes zero sense, and there's reason to feel cautiously optimistic and also very concerned. So let's talk about this new DPS line. On paper, it's exciting, it has a lot of potential, they could bounce off each other really well. I'm liking the additions of Viper and Hisu a lot, and they're the clear-cut strength of this roster. Hisu has been extremely consistent ever since he joined the league, one of the better hit scan players out there, especially last year. I've been waiting for him to get a new opportunity with better coaching and some better teammates, and on the surface that could be here if these new role swaps do work out in his favor and nobody struggles extremely bad. I feel bad for him in a way though. This is a really big gamble, and if it doesn't work out, then it's the same thing as being on Toronto or being a backup on Philly, just so unfulfilling and undeserving. He deserves a true chance at greatness, and I'm worried he's not going to get it here. One thing's for certain though, he's going to do his absolute best to carry this team and be their primary playmaker. We all know Hisu, we all love him, we know what he's capable of. What people are probably a bit more interested in, if you don't pay any attention to contenders, is Viper, a flex DPS player. This is his first shot at the league ever, and he comes from, you guessed it, the almighty O2 Blast. During his time in contenders, Viper has made a name for himself on Genji. That has been his signature hero over the last year or so, and people do have some question marks about what else he can really do. Genji's the true thing he has shined on, and people are curious about his overall flexibility. But given that he did come from O2 Blast, he is clearly a very talented individual, and he's under Coach Moon now. If Coach Moon doesn't go completely crazy and have a complete and utter collapse like we saw during the Valiant days, he could probably coach Viper up into a pretty reliable flex DPS. There's a boatload of potential with this guy. Some people have considered him to be OWL level. Didn't really matter where he was going to go. People just wanted him in the league. And I think it's great that the Dragons added some youth. It's something they've been missing for a long time now. They've been rocking with the same veterans, and things have gotten stale. This is refreshing to get somebody like Viper in there to make things feel new and exciting, and to give your team a new dynamic that could help improve them over time. Maybe Viper's the guy that Shanghai build their team around moving forward if they don't go fully Chinese or anything else in the near future. He seems like he could be that kind of guy if he is formed and molded into the ideal flex. It all depends on how he progresses and how much confidence he can gain throughout this year and what Coach Moon and the rest of this team can teach him. He has a lot of veterans to show him the ropes, so I have confidence that he could be pretty good. Obviously, there is a lot to look out for if you're watching the Dragons this year just because of all the crazy role swaps going on, but Viper deserves some time in the spotlight here too. He could end up being a somewhat important part of this team if they intend to be anywhere near successful. At the very least, this could be a great stepping stone year for Viper to put his name out there and pave a way for his career to be long-lasting in this league. Individually, he could still play pretty well even if the Dragons are down in the dumps, and sometimes that's all you need to end up getting transferred somewhere else, or for someone else to take interest in you during free agency. Viper just needs to have a good year. I'm hoping that much at least. But what about our boy Gangnam Jin? Well, I have some questions here. In the event that Diem is on flex support, which seems likely, that means our boy is heading back over to main support. And unfortunately, if you paid any attention to the NYXL last year, you'd know that he struggled big time on this role and was one of the worst main supports in the league. It's to no fault of his own. He shouldn't be on this role to begin with. Flex support is where he shines, and it's where he has always shined throughout his entire career. But unfortunately, that doesn't matter. Regardless, his performance was pretty trash, whether it be Lucio, Brig, did not matter in the slightest. There is a world where he ends up improving. Maybe he just needs better coaching. Maybe he just needs another season under his belt with this role. But I have my doubts, just because I don't know how much Gangnam Jin can really grow at this point. This is going to be his 4th season in the Overwatch League. We already know what he's capable of. We know his general ceiling. How much could he really increase it at this point in his career when he's playing a role that he's not nearly as good at? And the result that you put Diem on main support instead, well, that's probably even worse if I'm being honest with you. Going from DPS to flex support is not nearly as difficult as going from DPS to main support. There is a big difference there. You could try and quote-unquote soften the blow by having Gangnam Jin at least be on his natural role, but in return you might struggle even greater than you would if you just had him play main support instead. Either way, it feels like a lose-lose situation where your backline is not going to be particularly strong. For the sake of Shanghai fans, let's pray that Gangnam Jin can improve. He definitely has it in him. I think it's going to be hard for him. He has a lot of work to do individually, but he did play in a bad NYXL team, so maybe with better coaching and better help around him, he can be a better player. And that's honestly all Shanghai needs at this point. Just something aside from the DPS to play well and reliably. Whether Fleta is the only tank, or there's another one next to him, and whether Diem is the flex or main support, the Dragons have a lot of different obstacles to overcome this year if they want to be anywhere near decent. Because right now, it feels like they are putting themselves in a position to fail. I could be wrong, but this feels like one of those classic Coach Moon crackpot roster strategies. Maybe there really wasn't enough talent out there that he liked, and he thought that the team synergized the best this way, but that just feels wrong with how unnatural some of these positions feel. It doesn't make any sense. It feels like there's so many weaknesses and holes and questions you have to cover. Hisu feels like probably the only shoo-in to be a solid contributor consistently. The rest of these guys, there's so much work cut out for them, and I can't help but wonder how high this Dragons team can even finish in their current state. Can they be a top 3 or 4 team in APAC? Can they even beat some of these contenders teams they'll be going up against? I really don't know. It's of course worth giving this team a chance like any before seriously judging them and totally giving up on them, but man does this feel like a YOLO team on the surface. I don't know what the heck Coach Moon is cooking over there, but it does not give off the greatest vibes. It gives me big time flashbacks to the Valiant days. For all Shanghai fans watching this video, I'll pray for you and I'll hope that things do work out in your favor, but I'm not getting my hopes up, that is for sure. Being too optimistic would be a major mistake in this scenario. And yeah, that essentially sums up my thoughts on the new look Shanghai Dragons. They're not a group that inspires a lot of confidence, and I would not expect them to be a top team in the region for another consecutive year, but maybe I'm wrong, and maybe you disagree. And if you do, and you maybe think the Shanghai team has some hope, let me know down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this content and you want to stay up to date with all things Overwatch League news related, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel if you're new. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.